when I work with clients that are very quick to second guess.
You're tuned in to Leadership Beyond Burnout, where we encourage you and your organizations to heal, lead, and succeed. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. I'd like to welcome back all of our fired up friends. And if you're new, listen for some of the actionable steps and challenges to begin to integrate into your life and your workplace. They're typically very helpful. And feel free during the show to send questions to us or our guests, and you can connect with us at drkimberlywilson.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Leadership and Resilience Consultants. Their mission is to create healthy workplace cultures while addressing burnout and removing barriers to a psychologically safe workplace, while still giving women the tools to recover from and prevent burnout. Let's introduce our guest today, Ashley Rodriguez. She's an integrative trauma practitioner experiencing in working. You know what? I'm going to record this on my own and just start over because I didn't change your eyes to, and it's doing too much thinking for me. Okay.
I should have done that, but I was really battling allergy season. So sorry, that was a quick copy and paste.
No worries. I can start over and just record it and fix it. Okay. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you here, and I'd love for you to share once more how you bring healing to the world so that our guests understand that.
Absolutely. So I, as you mentioned, I am an EMDR specialist, and what that looks like is I integrate the many pillars and aspects of holism and wellness into traditional trauma clinical work. And so from a multicultural perspective, we are able to deconstruct and dissect the discrepancies, the blockages, the obstacles that, if you will, get in the way of our ability to give meaning to and uniquely define self-care and rest for self, especially from the perspective of clients that my group practice works with, which tend to be folks from marginalized backgrounds. And so we are able to see how intersections and identity can create obstacles to be able to rest your system.
That's beautiful. And I'd love to bring that down to the very base level in terms of the workplace. Because I know that I grew up in Detroit, and 90% Black city. So racism, it really wasn't something that I experienced. And I had the workplace trauma. So I'd love to hear how you help folks with workplace trauma and challenges in that way, racism, things like that.
Yeah, what I find, and with even my experience of experiencing classism, racism as the Afro-Caribbean identifying female, I definitely see those aspects being triggered in the workplace. We are living in a time where there is a fight And I will, before I would have said trajectory or push, but now we are seeing a fight, especially on the precipice of this upcoming election, the fight for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that does not just affect people of color, but it also affects the LGBTQ plus community. It affects women. It affects so many different protected classes. And when we are fighting for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, that means that we are also fighting for spaces where their intersections can safely coexist. But a
Right.
lot of times when there is racism in the workplace, that can ignite, if you will, those preceding triggers. And now that becomes conflated into the workplace and it exacerbates mental health illnesses that we are already seeing.
Exactly. And I would suppose that gets even more compounded when people in the workplace are then gaslit about the experience that they're having because I don't think anyone ever says, "Oh, I'm a racist," or "I can admit that I'm a racist." It usually comes up in some hidden way, whether it's challenging. I've heard a lot of people talk about their qualifications and
Mhm.
education being challenged, um, their right to exist in certain spaces, the need to insert themselves in conversations when more than one or two are gathered and they're not part of the conversation. Yes. So,
I do believe also a part of revolutionizing rest is the encouragement of people to be themselves, right?
mm,
And so that also means, especially for Black women or Black females, um, when, as we just naturally exist in the workspace, right? There may be some that just don't like to talk, and
mhm,
how that can be systemically and societally perceived, which then produces anxiety and pressure to overcompensate in that area or in other performative ways, which then breaks down their ability to rest. So, what I do believe a part what I do believe should be a part of the conversation is,
mhm,
as a part of core rest, right, is the conversation of what it's like to organically exist comfortably and naturally inside of your own skin.
mm. Now that's a mouthful. What it's like to just exist in your own skin and as well resist the assaults to your persona and your ego that are happening externally. Uh, I've just seen a lot of women who, when they're trying to feel whole
Mm-hmm.
and integrate all their different identities, that it almost feels as if that's when there's a greater assault on
Mm-hmm.
the person and their identities.
I you know I think one of in my professional opinion, one of the issues that's faced in this conversation is comes to how we view our goals and success, right?
Mm,
And that in a myriad of workplace settings is based on performance, projection, right? Promotion. And so, what I find the question, or the greater assault, as you say, being how much of self am I pressured to give up
mm,
or put away during the workday to be able to achieve my desired goals and objectives. So then how do we then teach, whether it's clients, whether we are stepping in as consultants, whether we are teaching, whether we are supervising, where then do we say, well, this is the path? It becomes rather murky, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even further compounded if you're doing the same thing at home. If you're denying parts of yourself to keep the peace at home, whether it's a cantankerous partner, or you have kids, or you have parents, that all these people that you're trying to serve and support, and there's just no room for being comfortable in your own skin because you don't even have time to acknowledge that you have an existence.
And a lot of it does, I agree, come down to time. I tell my husband and I talk about this all the time, where we'll check in with each other and he'll say, Ashley, how are you? And I'll say, I'm tired. Take a nap. Let me squeeze that in. Mm-mm, I don't have that, right? Because between being a wife and a mother to a 4-year-old
Right.
who's very hyperactive and a PhD student on the precipice of dissertation and a business owner who is sitting at the top of an actively expanding practice, where do we find the time to just be? And if those are my roles,
Mm-hmm.
right, then anybody else would take a step back and say, well, what are my roles and how is that really impacting, right, my ability to show up for self?
Yeah.
That is that we don't, it's the time, right? And I remember during my master's program where the conversation was, make sure you get self-care in. Okay. Okay. Yeah, just find time.
Manufactured time.
Okay. Okay. And now we have to sit here and find time. And then this is where the cycle, right, of the fight
Right.
begins. And so I really, on my journey of learning self care, not just for myself, but also teaching it to others, I believe one of the best places to start is looking at all of the things that take up your time and really evaluating for yourself. Number one, is this worth the sacrifice? Time is a sacrifice. Wherever you're allotting it to, it is a sacrifice. And if it is, how much of my time is being sacrificed? Is that proportional?
Right.
And what is the return of investment?
Right. Because you're really talking about what did we really find important versus what
Exactly.
society says is important. Because I remember now you're an active doctoral student, and I remember when I got to that point of dissertation, and that thing has to be done. so so those last classes, I made the decision that, like, I'm gonna pass these classes,
Mm.
but I'm not. I cannot focus all my energy on there because this thing has to be done. Was it to the level? Were the other classes to the level that I wanted them to be? That my ego desired them to be? No. But when you talk about that return on the investment,
Hmm.
I would have been somewhere in a corner crying, sucking my thumb if I was trying to just be perfect in the other classes and do a dissertation at the same time and have children in school and work and all of that. It just wasn't going to happen. So that's what I decided to sacrifice.
Right. And, I learned I more so, I cannot remember for the life of me, the professor I had, but she said, you will sacrifice something one way or another. And so even self-care, sometimes when responsibilities compete,
Mm. Yes.
that may be temporarily sacrificed. And that is actually okay in the grander scheme of things with, again, a plan, right? Okay, this is not forever. I just may need to buckle down right now and I need to handle some things. And this is what I am aiming for, or this is the finish line, right? And then I get that break. And so however you construct it, there must be some semblance of a balance.
Mm-hmm.
That is not always easy to find. And I find that that is always an ever evolving concept.
Yes.
But I believe that everything must be achieved in balance. So there may be a time to work and sweat, but there is also a time to rest and rejuvenate. And both, in self awareness, both components are vital.
And sometimes we need to also, I would say, also evaluate whether our rest is actually restorative or destructive. 'Cause I remember when we would plan to, oh, let's go on vacation, let's do these cruises. You got to pack. You got you got to get everything corralled. You got to clean. I have to clean the whole house before I leave. All of these things adding up to like, wow, I'm exhausted. And is it really restorative?
I tell some of my clients more so as I work with, I find myself working with women of color lately, and women of color in the workplace as well. And one of the things that I really find myself preaching and teaching, and sometimes they'll say, Ashley, stop fussing at me. And I'm like, those are your parts being mad. But I will say, I said, are you doing it for you, or are you doing it because you think it sounds good, because you saw it on a blog somewhere on
Right.
Pinterest, or because there's some semblance of societal pressure that says this is what I ought to do, or what enjoy, or what joy, to enjoy it looks like, rather than what your system is
Mm-hmm.
craving for. And
Right.
sometimes that could mean I want to sleep in bed for 4 days and I'm going to lock the door and I'm going to turn my phone off and don't call me. Okay.
Mm.
And that's not depression. Sometimes that's hibernation. Bears do it all the time.
Right. Right. And
Why
sometimes
can't
rest is
we?
active. For like I enjoy putting together furniture. And that can be very therapeutic for me to be able to
Mhm.
build something and put it together and then see it completed, especially if I'm experiencing a period of chaos, and to see like, oh wow, I accomplished this. Okay. That's my little serotonin. I feel good.
Mhm.
And then I can come back, which would seem very odd, like you're working, but I love it.
But it's and the, and it I believe it goes back to how we assign meaning to things,
Mhm.
right? Because work, what can be considered work in denotative definition, is multifaceted. And it doesn't have to mean what we initially prescribe it to. So said, if I walked up to you one day and said, "Oh, Dr. Wilson, I came from work," you might immediately think, well, she probably came from her job, but I could have just come from the gym.
Mm.
I could have come from an art class, and that is too considered by definition work.
Mm.
And so it really again comes back to how we assign value, significance, and weight to what we're talking about. What is work? Does it necessarily have to be so tumultuous and laborsome? Could work be positively enjoyable?
Mm-hmm. For some
Maybe
people.
for some people. And then it goes, you can then split the onion further and further and further. And so what I find is that self-care with a big S and a big C is a nuanced and unique definition for everybody. And that
Yeah.
is why people struggle to define it every day.
Yes. Absolutely. It takes it takes a little bit of curiosity and exploration to be able to find what your unique rest is. Like another odd one I have, and I don't know why I'm sharing so much. Y'all are learning a lot about me today. Uh, I went to, what is it called? Cracker Barrel. I went to Cracker
Mm,
Barrel and I bought some Jacks. I don't know if people remember Jacks, the
the
little stars, the little bat
yes,
and ball, and I was playing Jacks, but my onesies, twosies, and that was so therapeutic for me to be able to return to a time. So not only did I have some tactile stimulation and I had some mental stimulation, but I also was emotionally transported back to a simpler time.
hmm,
And it's very hard to worry and think about other things when you're trying to pick up jacks.
I agree.
So yeah, it
Even
takes
from even down
exploration.
to a neurobiological standpoint with memory, right? Focus, attention, perception, all of those things, I wholeheartedly agree that when something so simple,
Hmm.
right, can draw your attention, and I find it to be disconnecting from stressors and connecting back to core. And who I find talks about this, I feel, in unrelated ways, but very significantly relatable, would be Dr. Shorts, with internal family systems. And he discusses the 8 C's of self leadership.
Hmm.
And I find that, connecting back to parts of us, right, that we may feel disconnected from on more of a day-to-day basis, not from necessarily a trauma perspective, but to say, like, when we're in the hustle and grind and the bustle and going, we are really less present. So if we are less present, then one would say that we are less connected from pieces of our self, our
Yeah.
core. And so those things that we find as simple and therapeutic, I wonder if that's just a way of getting us to reconnect to self.
Hmm. Absolutely. And
And
I'm
could
going to ask for the audience because somebody's sitting there saying, "Well, what are the 8 C's of leadership?" So please share.
self leadership. I I'm going to take this out of. I want to keep this in the context of self care. So I will let Dr. Schwartz have his thing, and I'm not getting any type of commission. But please go pick up No Bad Parts by Dr. Richard Schwartz. It'll save your life. But what I find within the context of self care, right, self leadership to be is is just the active and in real time demonstration of courage
Mm.
to allow self to be led by belief and intuition. Simple as that. To have the courage to just allow yourself to naturally and organically be led, I believe, is the definition of leading oneself. And that would mean that you exceed past societal, systemic pressures and definitions of what the belief is that you should be, and allowing yourself to evolve and be developed into naturally what that may be as it comes.
Now, and I would surmise that that would take a lot of discernment and belief that you are able to be to discriminate and determine what is of me and what is other influence. Um, is there anyone that you should? Is there any sign that someone should look for that you think is like maybe you need to hone your intuition more?
Mm-hmm. I believe, for me, what I see as a clinical practitioner when I work with clients that are very quick to second guess
Mm.
and in real time to doubt the very notion that just fell out of their mouth. That is a telltale sign that, we want to work on increasing our ability to trust oneself, to guide oneself. Because if you are not being led by self, you are being led by an external influence. And if that be the case, are you pleased or content with the influence you're being led by?
Yes. Yes. And it takes some work to really figure that out and to see that and have eyes and the wisdom to know I'm following things that don't serve me and are not about me, and it's somebody else's dreams for my life. It's often sad for me to see women in advanced age and then they discover, wow, I never wanted this path. I
Mm-hmm.
did this because my aunt, mother, brother, sister couldn't do it, so I did it for them.
And I too echo the sadness that on this side of the chair, right? We hear day in and day out of I'm trying to find myself now, which is still good.
Yeah.
This is kind of where we say better late than never. However, that still comes with a level of grief and loss for the time that was spent
Yes.
following, call it a subscription, if you will, that you believed until you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
There is grief and loss associated with that, as much as, well, now I can shift, right? But a lot of times I find that where I find the difficulty in the work that we do as clinical practitioners is getting folks to shift,
Mm-hmm.
right? From this is what I lost to this is what I have.
Right.
Because we are so acculturated to loss. Oh,
Right.
I lost something else. Okay. Let me go mourn over that because that is what we have been accustomed to do.
Right. What is the deficit? And I need to get it back. And sometimes when we lose something, we absolutely don't need it back. It's the last
Right.
thing we need back.
But I tend to tell folks something must be lost in order for you to gain something, and that is the true balance. You must lose something, even if it is shedding an outdated belief.
Mm-hmm.
You must lose something in order to gain something. And so a part of what I do, and the way I approach my clinical work is we balance and we say, okay, we're not going to take the false positivistic road and say, we're not going to worry about this, but we're going to work and heal through this grief and allow it to healthily frame how we maneuver what we're gaining and what we have. And so the way that I frame that is, okay, now we're at a zero. We're no longer at deficit. and we don't have to be here anymore unless you choose to. I mean, then you can. That's you. But we can come up here, because when we're up here, we can come up here.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, we were never taught anything about up here. Right? So we have to clear this deficit to be able to gain. And a lot of what we gain too is a new perspective that we can pass forward, so that succeeding generations don't have to fight the way that we did.
Exactly. And I love that you mentioned the fact of acknowledging the loss and going through the loss. What I see so many times is some toxic positivity where we just want to skirt past the loss because it's too painful. I'm just going to move on and it's going to be great, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's still there. But so you need to take time to process that. And I've actually been on the journey for this a past year and a half of acknowledging some of the losses that I've just let pass me by. And there's been such exponential growth. So I love that you said I can absolutely testify to that exponential growth.
I think one of the goals that I have throughout my career is to shift the narrative on self-care in a way that self-care doesn't feel good all the time.
Mm.
Self-care does not feel good all the time. It's not just getting massages and drinking rosé and getting lunches. Okay. Sometimes it is crying and it is going inside of yourself and facing dark parts of yourself to learn deep truths about yourself as you continue to grow and evolve as a human being living this experience. That is too a part of self-care. And that's why when I teach people about self-care, I will always say capital S, capital C, because there are so many subsections and subcontexts under those subsections that frame this concept as a whole. And so what I do believe is more a call of our responsibility is to get a little bit more real about this conversation.
To acknowledge it. Sometimes, I don't know if you've seen this in your work, when you talk about transforming and being able to engage in self-care, I see so many people like, I'm cutting this person off. I'm not bringing this person into 2020, whatever it is. And what we aren't learning is conflict resolution skills, sometimes the ability to connect and work through some things. Sometimes, yes, there are situations where there's no salvaging the harm that someone does to you, but that's not the majority of situations. I don't know if you find that as well.
I do. And, sometimes I have to tell people, listen, a part of self-care is also saying you're a part of the problem.
What?
That is going to work.
What? No. No.
And that's the response I love every time. Because a lot of what we, in this day and age, yes, I love that we are having increased conversations or more conversations that involve momentum around self-care, self-love, boundaries, and all of those things. However, the part that we can miss sometimes is, are we using this with the motive that is framed around our trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And so even when we talk about codependency and codependent behaviors, right, we also educate clients on using clinical jargon or recovery jargon, right? As a way of being able to, for lack of a better term, manipulate the situation that they are in.
Oh man, okay. You said the quiet part out loud.
I've been doing that since Northwestern let me in.
You said the quiet part out loud.
Let's talk about it. And that's the problem, is that we're not saying it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
I am here to say all the parts out loud. I want to say every asterisk out loud, every footnote that everybody seemed to miss, because this is the part of the conversation that we're not having that is causing the blockage of why we can't get where we want to go. And then we get mad and confused. Who's confused? I'm not confused. I know why we've been stuck the whole time, because we're not saying the parts out loud that need to be said. And I personally hold clinical practitioners and educators accountable for not saying the part out loud that need to be said.
Right. There was in a clinician group on Facebook, I just tongue-in-cheek made a post that if I hear one more client tell me that their mother, brother, sister, ex-boyfriend is a narcissist, I'm just gonna lose it. I'm gonna lose my crap, because there are not that many narcissists. There are not that many narcissists.
No, not at all. Last time I checked the research, it was really less than 5%. And that's just being exceptionally generous, because I know it's really less than 3. So a lot of the times we're using this language thinking that we understand the depth of it. And that can take away from the work we're doing, because we understand the difference between traits and states.
Yes.
Traits and characteristics. Right? The general population, don't come for me. The general population is not necessarily going to know that, but we can throw these words around because we don't want to do the work ourselves. On top of that, let's take it a step further. What exactly did you do to contribute to this response that you got before you called somebody a narcissist?
Right. Right. Everyone is not a narcissist.
Everybody is not a
relationships. It's systemic.
Maybe sometimes we just have unhealthy coping patterns. And what I do like to tell people is that relationships are actually healthy stomping ground to heal those patterns, because some stuff you cannot heal on your own. Some stuff you need interactions from others to show you and shine a light of where you need to go care for self.
Right. Right.
Caring for self is also being held accountable. See, these are all the things nobody wants to talk about. This is the part of self-care. This is the dark part of self-care nobody wants to talk about.
Yes, yes. And I think sometimes that goes unsaid. Dare I say this? It goes unsaid because sometimes clinicians, psychologists are concerned about, what if I lose this client? Are they going to want to hear this?
But what does that mean? What does that say about you? What is the ethical responsibility that we hold as practitioners?
Right. Right.
And so, personally, I would rather stand on the truth than stand on favorability.
I'm not here to be liked, right? I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to help you grow.
That's my self-care. I think it's time for us to be honest.
Yeah.
It's time for us to be honest.
And not brutal.
Right, but say the quiet parts out loud. Because this is what's hurting people, clients and clinicians alike. Because we're not saying the uncomfortable parts out loud. We'd rather just read about it instead.
Yes. And you just made me think as well about the quiet parts that we don't say in the workplace, just bringing it back to what you said, accepting your full self and being your full self in that environment. And when people are violating other people's rights and just being rude. So in that way, and disrespectful or just difficult to work with,
Mhm.
depending upon the hierarchy within the organization. Many people don't get to face the reality that they're not helpful, that their leadership is toxic.
Right. And we have the responsibility from top up to be proactive about changing that. I do agree that, yes, while feedback is necessary and needed, what I do believe exists on the other side of that coin is proactivity and leadership. We need to be holding ourselves accountable and responsible for how we are walking the talk of self-care and resilience and leadership to be able to demonstrate that example to our subordinates.
So if someone in a leadership position came to you right now and was like, I want to do this. How can I start? What Give me one or two things I can do that I can actually accomplish right now.
The first thing that I would say is sit down by yourself, just with you and you, right? And evaluate and rate yourself as a leader as if you were the subordinate.
Mm-hmm.
Take it, right? I don't care if you're a good person. I don't care if you're an amazing golfer. Take yourself out of it and put yourself in their position, which is called empathy, and evaluate yourself and your leadership style, approach, and ability. That is the first thing that I would recommend before you go to your staff and sit down and say, hey, how are things going?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's, how are things going? Do we need a quick amnesty hour? Do I need to hear it? Do I need to hear it? Because that saves space for people to say, hey, actually, you suck, dude. You need to hear that sometimes to go and sit by yourself and evaluate self and how you can improve.
Yeah, that's a really great start, and I'd love for you to be able to issue to our audience either a personal challenge or a workplace challenge for them to go further in anything that we've talked about.
My personal challenge is to pause and evaluate where you are in your life and not to judge or compare, but in a sense of where am I allotting my time? Does that make me happy? Is there something more that I want to do with my life? Is there more that I really believe I can contribute to the greater good that would really just fulfill me inside? I encourage anybody that comes across this interview to ask themselves that. And whatever that answer is, I really motivate you to demonstrate courage to follow that blazing trail forward.
I love that. I really love that. It's very uplifting, and it gives them a place to start. It's not even it's not even threatening. There's not even any action. It's just thinking. That-
So we start.
Thank you so much for being here today, Ashley. I'm glad that we got to have you back after our video challenges last time. And I definitely wanted everyone to be able to see your inflections, your voice, to see your beauty, and just the eloquence with which you speak. So it was an honor and a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. And until next time. Everyone, you've been watching Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. You can find us here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 2 p.m. Pacific. Until then, we shall see you next week.